We are going to start in 3, 2, and 1. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of Coffee with the Freight Coach. My name is Chris Jolly. I am your host, and I am the Freight Coach. Before we jump into today's episode, as always, thank you guys so much for coming out and listening to this podcast. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome. This is the real side of freight, ladies and gentlemen. And what do I mean by that when I say that? I say that literally every single time. I only speak to transportation professionals on this show, you guys, as well as my weekday live show, because I want to put the right information out there from the people who have done what you're looking to do or who are currently doing what you're trying to achieve. So you can take all that information, apply it, utilize it, and see a meaningful difference in your business and your life. It's one of the many, many reasons why I proudly fly this American flag behind me every single day. A, we're the greatest nation on earth, but B, I'm living my American dream, and I want to help each and every one of you live yours as well. I do have one small favor to ask. If and when you get value from what you hear in this episode today, subscribe to the show, you guys. Get it out there to your network. That's how we are the top podcast in transportation, is because of each and every one of you, and the fact that if you see value in it, your network's going to see value in it as well. I got a very special guest for you guys here today. As you can see from the ones who will be seeing a video component of this, you can already see my guest on the show here. But for those of you hitting it up on audio, we're here to talk about Canadian freight. We're here to talk about cross-border, LTL, all of that stuff, and what are the main differences between U.S. freight brokerage and Canadian freight brokerage. So I thought, who better than to have Mr. Robert Kowton on the show? He's an agency owner within SPI Logistics, as well as CDN Freight Broker all over YouTube. So Robert, thank you so much for joining me here.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be here.
Nah, man, it's a pleasure. It's funny because it's like every time you comment, when I'm going live and stuff on my show, like I just get in the zone, right? Like I'm doing my stuff, I'm reading the comments, and I always forget. And I'm like, it's Robert. Stop saying CDN Freight Broker. It's Robert who's coming on there. So I appreciate your support, man. You've tuned into the live show multiple times over this time frame, man. And but before we go any further, how'd you get your start in freight, Robert? Like, what brought you into this industry?
Well, it's really funny, but yeah, I know you talk about your family history in trucking, and I seem to, whenever I come across people who are freight brokers, there's always a component that their family did. So I've never had a CDL license, so I can't say I've done that. But how my start came is my dad was a trucker. He wasn't an owner operator, but he worked for a variety of companies. As long as I was a kid, he was a trucker. In fact, when I got older, he was a trucker, but he was able to get a job that kept him in the city, and the CDL license paid for him. But for years, in fact, there was a Rocky Mountains. Many of you know the Rocky Mountains. Well, there's a place called Jasper, Alberta, and at Jasper there was a tramway, just like there was in Banff. He hauled the first piece of steel for the building of that tramway, so that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I got to, over the years, he was, like I said, he thought about being the owner operator, but the numbers just didn't make sense. So he worked for CN Rail. He worked for several other companies and doing, nights and days. And he was that classic trucker, because I knew what he was trucking because he wore the pointy brown leather boots, cowboy boots. He was going trucking. That's how I knew. And I got to go with him to travel across the country with him from Toronto and stuff like that. So that started. And then I went to university, at the University of Alberta, and leapfrog. After a couple of years of my degree, I'd worked in kind of recreation management, and then I jumped into Coca-Cola bottling. A friend of mine got me going there, and I was at Coca-Cola bottling for 10 years. And that really leapfrogged me, because I spent 2 years in a small town, like I was in Edmonton, but I moved for Coca-Cola to a smaller town. And when I was there, I really had to manage the sales, but I also managed the fleet. I only had 2 trucks, but it was my job to manage, and I had to maintain. So I had to learn. And then when I came back to Edmonton, I became ultimately a district sales manager in the bulk division. So we were filling the trucks with truckloads, going to wholesale clubs, grocery stores, filling, the 53s. Yeah. So I had to really work with the distribution team as far as managing the volumes on a daily, how many trucks we're going to need, and so forth. So that really got me going. And then I had an opportunity. A friend of mine says, you should, they saw the hours I was working and how hard I was working. They said, you could do really well as a freight broker. So in 2008, I started freight brokering. And I started from ground zero. I had no experience freight brokering, but this person mentored me. And I would work 6 a.m. I'm in the mountain time zone. So I'd start at 6 a.m. So it's 8 a.m. in the east. And I'd work till 6 p.m. when it's 5 p.m. in the west. Yeah. And I just busted my butt. My kids were young and I had nothing to lose. So I just had to bust. And I was diligent. And I just went out there and I learned everything I could learn. And one of the things I did that was super successful for myself was I, in fact, still have one of my customers, my very first load went from BC to Georgia, and I still have that customer today.
Oh, wow.
So, and one of the keys I did was I learned a lot. And as I booked loads, every time if I could go meet a driver, I met them. I helped them sling straps and helped them put the tarps on. They're like, "Who are you?" Yeah. And I just went out there and learned everything I could. And I became a lot of brokers tend to be mode focused or lane focused, right? Yeah. Some will just do reefers. That's what they focus on. Or others will say they work a lane. They stay in certain lanes and that's all they do. They don't worry about going beyond that. Only shippers within those lanes in that mode, like they're, dry van specialists hauling grocery items from grocery warehouse and so forth. Me, I went a different approach. I took the approach thinking, well, to be diversified, the person who mentored me says, stay away from produce, stay away from steel pipe, and stay away from lumber were the top three.
Yeah.
So I thought, the economy goes up and down. So I tried to be diversified. So I focused on customers. Mm-hmm. I found customers that needed help. And where I found when I started, a lot of the local trucking companies were all close. So long story short is I found my niche was helping them get freight across the border. Yeah. So that was the start. And then it led to, I focused on getting customers that had, most of my customers do a variety of things. I'm shipping one customer. I might do, like right now, I've got drayage, dry van and flatbed all going on with the same customer. So I'm doing multiple modes via a customer. So I take their needs and fit it. So sometimes they want slow and cheap. Sometimes they want fast and they're willing to pay the money. And I take the needs of the load and match them together. So that's, and then to quickly, I'll finish is after I was with one brokerage from 2008 to 2016, and then I switched to SPI in 2016 and I've been with them since.
Man, there's a lot to unpack with what you said there, Robert. And, I think you utilizing your experience in the beverage world at Coca-Cola, leveraging that industry knowledge to get into freight brokering and everything else. But I think your approach is, because I talk a lot about the niche, right? Like I talk, and a lot of it is geared towards because a lot of the questions that I get is like, how do I find customers? And if you've never sold freight before, you need to choose one thing to really build up off of, because otherwise, how do you really separate yourself out there in the industry, especially in today's day and age when there's 20,000+ freight brokers that are out there? And I'm always about this. If you've never sold freight before, start with one thing, own your backyard and start with one freight type and build up off of that. With me, because we just started, we pretty much just eclipsed the 1 year mark with my agency in SPI Logistics. And I found a ton of success in just selling open deck and heavy haul. And yes, we accommodate dry van freight, of course, but I'm not going out, I'm not calling food shippers. I'm not doing any of that. I'm staying inside of the construction equipment, building materials. I do haul an extensive amount of pipe and stuff like that. And that's really my niche that I'm building up off of. But as we grow and expand, my long-term vision for a lot of this stuff, Robert, is I want complete subject matter experts inside of my organization. I want to niche it down to where it's my carrier reps are only flatbed carrier reps, or they're only step deck carrier reps, or specialized equipment. And then same thing with dry van and same thing with reefer. I want to build out like with that, because I feel like there's an element to that, but that's to each individual, right? If you've been in the industry and you have a ton of experience, don't necessarily choose that one lane if you don't want. A lot of it, when I talk about it, is it's where do I start? And I think that if you go out there and you cast such a wide net, you talk yourself out of a lot of opportunities. And, you brought up produce as one of those things to stay away from. Everybody offers produce, but but the thing is everybody goes after produce shippers and then they all chase the same freight markets. And then it's how do you really stand out in that crowd? And for me, the most success is when I'm going in there and I'm talking to a shipper and it's no, I've hauled hundreds of thousands of steel loads or pipe loads or construction equipment. This is what I know. I'm asking very technical questions when I'm prospecting them, as opposed to, hey, let me learn about your business. It's no, I know your business. Let's talk about the intricacies involved in that and why I'm different. And I think that's one of those things that I've found success in. But again, what works for me might not work for somebody else. I just know that if you're just going to go out there in the spray and pray model and go after everything, I feel like you're going to have a lot harder time to build up a loyal customer base.
Right. And I think you nailed it a couple of key things, but maybe 3 weeks ago, one of your lives on a Friday Q&A, you have the exact same mentality that I did. You mentioned if you're going to go out and cold call, instead of cold calling like a produce place, then your next call is some kind of a steel pipe, and the next one is this. Pick one commodity. When you're first coming out in this industry, pick a commodity. Let's just use, say, bobcats as an example, because it goes on flatbeds. So you go out there and you start calling on the bobcat companies, because what you're trying to do is not just call and say, I want to move your freight. What you're more so trying to do is you're trying to understand the supply chain of that commodity. Who are the players and how does the freight get moved around? Because that's where I have one customer that's a distributor, and that has been a link to me getting to factories and to freight from them for over 10 plus years. That one contact has paid dividends for me for a significant amount of time. And I always show my appreciation to this customer because they're constantly giving me referrals, and that's been a bane of mine. But the point is, when you go out there, you take whatever you're trying to ship and you try to understand, because in some cases, you're going to have a situation where when, let's say some rental place needs to order a bobcat, if they order one, the factory they're ordering from, or if it's used, they may have to pay for it themselves. But if they order enough that's a truckload, now the factory will pay for the freight. Yeah. So there's different players, and that's what really you're trying to do, is understand who you are to build players. Because remember, when you're a freight broker agent, because I'm going to say, because I'm an agent, I've never been a freight broker per se, so I'll focus on that. There's no right or wrong way how to build your business. The key really is that you're excited. Yeah. You're excited to wake up every single day. And then if you aren't excited, trust me, your customers, your prospects are going to feel that fast.
Yeah.
And I found that something I learned from Coca-Cola that I've taken into this, and it's really paid well. Every single call, I don't just pick up the phone and call. I researched. I understood where they're coming from. I'm making notes, and I'm going in with something. I'm finding a niche, so that something that I can talk about, not to say I'm good. So I've mapped out my calls. So if they say no to this question, where am I going to go? If I say yes to this question, where am I going to go? And the key is go into every call with 3 objectives, and you're coming out with one. And that objective may only be that you figure out what is the email address to the shipping or logistics manager, or what is the contact person, or something like that. But you're going to have 3 goals, and you're not getting off that call unless you get one.
Yeah. And I agree on all of that approach, right? Like, and even going back to your customer thing and understanding the supply chain. And, like my thing is there's so many sales reps out there. And again, I will always use myself as an example because I've lived this life for a very long time. I struggled with gaining any real traction when I went after so much opportunity because I was trying to make a one-size-fits-all approach to sales when that doesn't necessarily work, at least for me. But where I found the most success, Robert, was when I went in with that one-trick pony approach, right? And I built up off of that. I had a better understanding. And then I feel like it's also, if you're going to go out there, say, again, you work for a company who's like, no, you're calling every commodity that's out there. We're going to call everything. If that's where you're at in this, I'd start looking for a new job, but that's irrelevant to the conversation right now. What is relevant is I would bank it all in one day. If you're going to call plastic manufacturers, call them all in the same day. And then if it's going to be food, call all of them in the exact same day, because what you will identify is all of those customers essentially have the exact same needs, right? They have the exact same problems, whether it's a trailer showing up that looks like Swiss cheese, or it's another trailer showing up for a food load where there's an odor in it and stuff like that. And you can talk to them about what their problems are, and you can position yourself to provide that solution without going in there with what's your biggest problem. It's, hey, I work with this cheese manufacturer. This is what we do from a washout procedure to ensure that the quality of the trailer meets your standards prior to arrival, as opposed to the driver showing up, bumping your dock, you rejecting the trailer, and then having them get a washout and then putting any further delays that are out there. And I think that you'll never understand that unless you go in and have a couple of tough conversations with somebody when they'll start questioning you, right? Because I think like the word freight broker it's an instant turnoff to a lot of shippers, because a lot of people don't do what you and I are talking about right here, Robert. They don't research the prospect. They don't do anything. They're calling for the sake of calling. And then what you're doing is you're just setting yourself up for failure. And when I'm saying research, I don't do 30 minutes of research on a company before I call them. It literally takes 3 minutes. I go to their website. I find out the multiple commodities or product offerings that they have. I find all their locations that they may have. And I also will look at current events, because a lot of companies are, if they're involved in a charity, if they do something in their local community, they post about it on their website. I want to be aware of that as well, so I can see, hey, congratulations. Worst case scenario, I just want them to have a positive interaction when they hear Chris Jolly, and that's it. That's my first strategy on my very first outreach. I want them to look, whether it's a cold email, a cold DM, or a cold call, I want them to look at my name and be like, well, at least he wasn't an asshole. You know what I mean? Like, I at least want to put a positive spin on things.
Well, the three things I focus on as a freight broker agent, if I was to suggest to consider for advice for new people, or even if you've been in it for a while. One, rather than just looking at yourself as a freight broker agent, we're consultants. We're that win-win between the shipper and the carrier, and we're trying to find solutions to match that. And part of that process is that we learn their business, meaning that we're starting at a foundation level where they don't know us, we don't know them, and you're building this relationship. But as you build up, you get to the point where they understand that you're willing to take a risk for them and they're willing to take a risk for you. You get to the point that, let's say I'll take culverts. When a customer doesn't have to say, okay, I got a truckload of culverts, they say, I'm going to have 6 pieces of the C20 that are 18 feet. I got 6 pieces of C12s that are 7 feet. And I got 4 pieces. You write it down. You're able to calculate without them questioning, because you know that the C20 is this much weight per foot. And this is the C12 is this much per foot because it's this thick. And you know the diameters of all of them. And you can put together what they're going to need. And you're able to now say, okay, yeah, this is going to be, actually, I can fit that as a partial. You know what? I can probably put that on a hotshot truck today because it's only going to be 10,000 pounds and 25 feet. That's one step, that you're the consultant to them at all times. Secondly, I'm only as good as my last load. I could do 1,000 loads for a customer. I screw up once, I could lose that account. Thirdly, the last thing I look at is I've built such a relationship. The ultimate freight broker I want to be is when the office has a little meeting or they have a sales meeting and they're sitting around the boardroom. Hey, guys, hey, group, we just won this contract. We're going to have a bunch of loads that we need. And the first thing they say is, I want Chris Jolly. I want Robert Kowton. That's who we're going to call. They're not going to blast it out to the masses. They're going to put it out there that they identify me as that contact. That's what I'm looking for.
I'm right there with you, Robert. And I think a lot of it too, I'm glad you brought that up about the culverts thing, because it's like when I'm sitting here talking to my prospects, for example, we move a lot of pipe, right? I know that the majority of it comes in 40 or 50 foot sections for the most part. And then, you get some 45 footers in there, because I know someone's going to listen to this and be like, oh, well, they're actually cut. I'm aware, but I'm able to ask that technical question. And then it's also, I can see some product descriptions out there and I'm going to understand, hey, that's a coil pipe that is wrapped up on a coil and that's shipped out like that. And then, oh, that's palletized and everything else, because I move a lot of it. And again, it's bringing that sense of ease to the table when I'm talking to my prospects, right? Where it's like, hey, this individual has hauled our stuff before. They are realistically going to send in the right equipment and stuff like that. Because again, as a broker, you can't send in a 40-foot hotshot to grab a 50-foot section of pipe or whatever that looks, like that will instantly get you out of network with a lot of these things. But again, it's understanding that stuff and bringing that sense of ease to your customers to where, you know what, they know that when they tender a load to Chris or they tender a load to Robert, good, bad, or indifferent, they're going to be kept in the loop and things are going to be accommodated, right? Because like at the end of the day, man, like I don't think enough people understand or can even conceptualize what hundreds of thousands of dollars of freight is actually worth. And that's what it is. It's a massive risk when you're utilizing a transportation provider out there, because I mean, I moved loads earlier this year that were a project and they were all $1 million a piece, man. There were 6 total. That's $6 million worth of cargo value right there. And you can't just send that out to anybody, right? You need people who understand what the hell they're doing in those instances. And so many people go into that stuff blind and they're like, oh, I can do that. And then they send in a carrier who doesn't even have $1 million in cargo insurance.
Right. And I think that it takes, the only thing I can really emphasize, if you're getting into the freight broker world, whether you are a driver that you want to get into it, get out of the truck and get into the back end operations through freight brokering, or however you want to get in the industry, you really truly need some mentors around you, because part of it comes, like, I believe my success is I don't just quote. I quote to execute, because I know there's some freight brokers that will just throw a number to a shipper and then they get the load and now they realize, oh, I didn't account for that. I didn't think about that. I didn't think about this. So for me, when I quote a load, I look at all the factors, where it's picking up, where it's delivering. What are they, if I know, because I guess you learn over time, but I'll give an example. Let's say you're going to a job site and there's going to be a crew of 10 people waiting. And there's a gear that you're shipping direct from the, the customers to the, to the job site. If it's middle of the winter time and there's snow, or if there's issues, you got to ask the questions, because I've been in this situation where all of a sudden, there's a crew waiting and the truck is delayed. Is your customer going to come to you and saying, we're going to have to charge you back for 10 crew at $35 an hour for the 3 hours that they sat around waiting for your truck?
Yeah.
So the idea, the point behind that is, there's times that you might use some different carriers for different things, but when I know there's certain requirements, I spend more time matching those carriers to it. So when I take extra time in quoting, so that I've made my notes, I've accounted for all this, the carriers that I know that I've talked to, and that's how I built a really strong relationship with the carriers, because I'll call them, hey, remember last week I talked to you about that? Yeah, that's a go. We're going to be going next week. Yeah. Oh, really? I didn't realize. And then, so the point is, I've talked to the carrier. They know everything about it. I know everything about it. And I want a successful experience for the customer and for the carrier. I want to show both parties, so that brokers are always worried about carriers backdooring them. My carriers won't, because I do it too good. They would rather have me do it than them doing it themselves. That's what I'm looking for.
I'm right there with you, Robert. And, in same thing, I'm going to touch on both of what you said there about, going out to a job site delivery. I'm dealing with that with some of my current customers, right? Like when you're hauling pipe, and, the shipper and the receiver are not your customer, right? Like your customer has ordered the pipe from one place, it's shipping out directly to their customer's job site. And again, it's a lot of back and forth, right? It's like, hey, I got to let the shipper know what's going on. I got to let the job site know what's going on. And I need to let my customer know what's going on. And then also informing the carrier, hey, this is that procedure that you need to follow. And, and to segue in, that's how you build up a successful carrier base as well, because we have freight that we move out of Colorado currently, for example, that some of it goes into trade shows. A lot of it is, direct to customer and everything. But again, we work with the same carriers time and time again. I will gladly, I don't even want to call it overpaying a carrier. But it's really the only way to describe it compared to the spot market is I am overpaying, but I'm paying them for the service that they've continuously delivered for me in those instances. And it's worth every single penny out there, because stuff does happen, right? Like I know that there's a lot of people who I watched the movie The Campaign recently, where they live in Rainbow Land and they think that everything's just going to be fine, but that's not the case. And when you have the right carriers on these shipments, when there is changes, I've had loads, for example, that I thought was going to Ohio, and then it turned out midway through transit, the load actually needed to go down to Tennessee. And boom, you know what? Just with a couple simple things, we rerouted trucks and we paid the carrier what they needed in those instances. And there was no back and forth nickel and diming. I just went in with hey, we got to come to a solution. This is where we're at style and mentality. And again, I work with the same trucking companies time and time again. And you're right. I'm not worried about them backdooring me at all. In actuality, Robert, I've gotten more referrals from my carrier network for other quality carriers than anything. They also indirectly turn into a sales force for me. Hey, I'm delivering into this facility all the time. I see trucks moving out of there. You should reach out to them. Or it's even gone as far as I've had drivers who had their own direct customers that they were picking up for and stuff, because they'd take my freight from Phoenix up to Northern Nevada. They'd drop there, and then they'd have their own customers out of Northern Nevada to ship back down to either Vegas or Phoenix or LA or something like that. And they're like, hey, man, I just wanted to let you know, this person's expecting your phone call. I really enjoy working with you. I was talking with them and they said that they needed some help with some of their transportation. You never get that unless you invest in that. And there's so many people who are so short-sighted, Robert. They're so transactionally focused of how much money can I get on this one shipment? They lose sight of the future opportunities that can arise. I'm not going to say will, because things are, it takes a lot of work to get out there. But when you identify and have that right carrier base inside of your network, you will legitimately blow past your competition, because so many people recycle through. And I think that if they recycle through their carriers, they're going to want to recycle through their customers as well, because people think others are replaceable. I don't have that mindset. Carriers and customers are 1A and 1B of importance to me. And I want to deliver such quality experiences on both sides of the fence that both of them want to work with me over everybody else.
Well, three things to that real quick is, one is, there's the old cliche that every load has a sales lead, right? The shipper and the consignee has prospects. Yep. But I was going to say, you brought up that exact great point. You have a customer that's located here, but they want you to pick up at this location, deliver it over here. So if you don't take the time and due diligence to learn that shipper's procedures and protocols, you want it so that that shipper never complains to your customer like, hey, Robert sent a truck in that didn't follow procedures, didn't do this. In fact, more often than not, I save a lot of time, because my customers will say, okay, here's a PO. We've assigned it to Robert at SPI. And then I phone and find out details that they weren't even aware of. Or some that there's a procedure, like you have to call 24 hours ahead, give the PO, then they issue a new pickup number. So you can never do same day pickups at that facility. And I educate my customers on that. So the point is, utilize your TMSs, take the time, make the notes. And then guess what? If you call that shipper every single time, hey, it's Chris, it's Robert, we got a truck coming on this date and time for this product. Is this the PO? Yep. Is this where we're picking up? Yep. Would you like me to send BOLs, or do you have some? Yes, so we do, or send them. And you do this time and time. Guess what? After you've called them 10 times in a row, one day they're just going to say, would you be able to help us out? Because they see the consistency. Mm-hmm. We didn't ask. You just demonstrated your consistency. And I think that's super, super powerful in there. And that's where, like, even myself as an agent, if a carrier calls me and it's not my load, or they have a question about AP or some other question, I don't blow them off. Oh, it's not my load. Click. Yeah. I help them out. I will research. I will put them on hold, call client care, wait for someone to pick up, then conference them in so that they're not dropped. And I had this the other day with a situation, and the person called me back and thanked me. And because I never wanted my book of business to interfere with the carrier relationships for your book of business within our network.
That's another piece that, I've been talking about this internally, and I'll even put this out there too, because I want to make it to where my customers, their customers feel inclined to want to purchase from them again due to the service that they received and the communication that they received with interacting with myself and my organization, right? Because there are so many instances where people just assume, right? I will have all the difficult conversations up front, Robert. I will talk to my customers. Who do I reach out to if something goes wrong, right? If the driver arrives and there's no paperwork, or they're the PO, or, if there's, heaven forbid, there's an accident or there's damage to the product, how do we handle this, right? Because again, back to the whole, I live in reality. I know that in that moment, because you know what? Freight does move on the weekends and everything else. I want to know who to reach out to in those instances. I also call ahead to every single facility that we pick up at and deliver to. I want to make sure, especially in my world, man, I want to make sure they have the right equipment on site to load or offload that product, because I've picked up from an active job site before. I've delivered to an active job site before. Guess what? Sometimes the product that we're picking up is on the opposite end of the job site. They have the equipment needed to load it on another job site, and they need to make sure that stuff is there. So again, communication, call ahead. Hey, I'm picking this load up tomorrow. What time can I be there? Do you have the equipment on site? Oh, shoot, you actually need to bring that tractor over there? Perfect, man. Do you want me to give you an hour heads up when our driver is emptying en route, or how does that work? Have these conversations on the front end, because again, that saves your drivers time during the pickup or during the delivery, and then they remember that. And then again, your customers and their customers will remember that when they're dealing with you, because most people, and by most, from the sounds of it, 99% of the people out there don't call. They assume. And then when you assume in this industry, that's when delays happen. That's when mess ups happen. And that costs people money in the real world, right?
I'm constantly educating our carriers. Like, they're super nice people. They're working hard. But some of the dispatchers still haven't learned how to maximize the technology. And that's an example. I had a shipment with a long story short is they said, oh yeah, we'll deliver Monday. And I'm thinking, well, I had a partial, like, 35 feet of the truck. They said, we're going to get another one. I said, there's no way you're delivering on Monday. Mm-hmm. And because I said, where you're delivering and how long it's going to take, there's just no way. Why would I just tell my customer I take the time, let's just map it out. We're the professionals, right? We're the professionals our customers expect us to be. And so we have to take a minute, use the ELDs, calculate where they're at, identify if there's any issues, obviously weather delays, and do our best guess estimate, and then present that to our customer in an open fashion from there. Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do, is make a win-win. But we have to be a bit more. Too many people jump in, and we expect drivers to know how to drive a truck with all these buttons and gauges and in there. But yet we come on behind a computer and we have these TMSs with all kinds of features. And a lot of people, and including carrier dispatchers, have no idea how to maximize those buttons on those computers to help the industry. And that's ultimately what we need to do.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, Robert. I want to make sure we touch on cross-border freight here. I feel like we could go down this, which this has been a phenomenal conversation here, man. I always enjoy talking to other individuals about their strategies and tactics, because again, at the end of the day, if I can give you a piece of information and learn from you, and vice versa, and the industry gets better for it, I'm all about that, right? I just want to improve people's lives and when they interact with me. That's
where, rendezvous, like, for example, when we get together as a group, that's phenomenal. You learn so much from there. It's so empowering to be able to be around other agents and learn from them. And like, for example, I have a little thing that I show people when I need to teach about it is, when you're a broker agent, you got to be wearing multiple hats until you're at the point where you're growing like a bigger office. But if you're by yourself, you got your customer development phase, which is prospecting, getting them secured, building credit, and the cycle goes on and on. Then underneath, you got your operations, where you're quoting freight, getting it awarded, matching the truck to the freight, tracking it, getting delivered, the paperwork, dealing with issues. And as part of that, as you build that, you may want to work on lane rates, etc. And it's a circle and then when you start to see how the sales process and the operations just overlap each other, those are the things that you got to think about. There's a lot of moving parts to this business. It's simple, pick up freight, deliver freight, but the more that you get into the deepness of it, you are going to build that from foundation to that alliance level with your customer. The more alliance relationships you have, the better long-term residual success and income you're going to have.
I can't disagree with that at all, man. So let's talk cross-border here.
Yeah.
What's the biggest misconception out there about cross-border freight? I've done an extensive amount of it going in and out of Canada, but what do you think is like the biggest hurdle to overcome if it's a new seller trying to move their first shipment in or out of Canada?
So the way I like to say it, I get often that exact situation. And the way I like to explain it is, cross-border freight is complex. And if someone comes to me and says, yeah, we're going to start shipping goods either to Canada or from Canada to US, and they say, we ship freight all the time. Great. So if you've been shipping freight from one state to another state, or even within your state, and you've never gone cross-border, I equate that to playing little league baseball or community baseball, or playing hockey, basketball, community basketball in your backyards or a local school, to now you're playing for the NBA, but yet you never really practiced to get there. You just jump from your community basketball court to now the professional leagues. That's kind of the equation I put it, because you're at a new level, right? You're dealing with international borders, which seems like Canada, US is synonymous, but there's a border there, and there's procedures on both sides. So don't underestimate the complexity of it. Respect the process required from both countries. We have to respect that, because it's not us brokers, when we're providing insight and information to you about how to get the freight crossed. We're not dictating it. We're just sharing the knowledge to make it an easier process. So a couple of notes I had is, so remember, as a freight broker agent, we are not the customs brokers, right? Either the importer or the exporter is required to set up a power of attorney with a customs broker to clear the goods at the border for either PAPs or PARs. So right there and then, there's probably 5 definitions that we haven't even touched the surface. There's multiple. So remember, individuals like you and I, you might decide, you know what, I'm going to get an RV. And you happen to find a good deal in Calgary, Alberta, or Lethbridge, somewhere's in Alberta. And you think, you know what, I'll take the family, we'll drive down, pick up the trailer, cross the border, import it, and do it. You could do that. Or if you're going to do the same thing with a car, you want to collect a car, you found this unique car, you can import stuff personally. There's procedures, but I'm going to focus on, because we work with businesses generally, business to business, B2B. How do businesses get freight across? So essentially, remember, you need a customs broker. They say, oh, well, you don't need a customs broker. Yes, you do. You need a customs broker because they streamline the global trade by facilitating the import and export of goods across international borders around the world via all modes. Could be air, ocean, ground. And remember, they do some of the things that the customs broker does for you. One, they will verify that the commodities that you want to ship are admissible to that country. That's first and foremost. Secondly, you have to get a power of attorney set up. You can't just, like a freight broker, there's no, there's not a load board out there where there's 10 customs brokers vying for the freight.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. You have to reach out, talk to them, find out their pricing. You guys come to that agreement. Then you have to set up the account, because the power of attorney, if you're new, and you think, okay, I got my first order, I'm ready to ship to my new client in Canada, from US to Canada, and you don't have a broker set up. Well, even if you call the broker right now on a Tuesday afternoon, you might get a call back the next day, and it'll probably take you at least 24 hours if you're going to stick with that same broker to get the account going. They're going to send you a power of attorney form. That's another time you get it back and filled out properly, and provided you didn't make no errors, that once they've received it, it's another probably 48 to 72 hours. And then you have to pay for the account, because customs brokers will hold your freight if you don't have an active account. You have to prepay it. So there's a whole bunch of things there. Then what happens, what they do, the customs broker will help you identify if you have goods saying, okay, this is what I ship. You need to have an HTS code, harmonized tariff system number. Well, they're going to help you identify those numbers. You need to list that. Are the goods made in Mexico, United States, or Canada? If so, now you need a USMCA form in order to so that you can save on the duties. So the basic gist is, goods coming from US to Canada, when the goods arrive at the Canadian border, they convert the value of the goods on the invoice to Canadian dollars, add applicable duties if applicable, plus GST. And so the broker is going to charge you the duty fee if applicable, the GST on the goods, and their fee. Now, and also there's a lot of little nuances. For sure. You talk about heavy equipment. You can't, if you have a dozer with tracks, when you pick it up, you can't just bring it to the border. It has to be power washed. No dirt, foreign dirt, can enter either country. And if it's used and it's self-propelled, you have to do the 72-hour notice coming from US to Canada.
Yeah.
You have to understand, what is CPP, Customs Border Patrol, which is the US side, CBSA, Canada Border Service Agency. So there's a whole bunch of things that happen, and you got to be set up as an importer of record in order to import the goods, or vice versa. So there's a lot of complexities to understand. There's understanding what happens if you don't have the documentation right, if you're missing information. So my role that I take is a consultant. Before freight is, when I'm quoting a customer, one, I'm going to find out what's required, because hypothetically, you could be shipping something from the United States, going through the Montreal port onto a vessel for furtherance to another country. So that's going to go as an in-bond freight. It's going to go as a bonded freight, sorry.
Yeah.
If it's going same thing from Canada, you might be picking up somewhere in Canada, it's going to go to Baltimore, Maryland, or Seattle, Washington port, where it's going to travel through the United States, but it's not going to land. The goods aren't staying there. So there's a whole process there, and you got to have the right kind of carrier. And if you need CT PAT carriers, there's just a whole bunch of stuff. So when I have quotes, you're going to quote match the right type of carrier that has the right qualifications. And then I always ask the customers for a copy of the commercial documents in advance, so I can review it, make sure that I'm just going to take my experience and say, I see this potential problem. And I also call the brokers, and I'll go over the documents. Do you see what I'm seeing? Am I wrong here? Oh yeah, you're right. We should get them to fix that. Yeah. So, because customs brokerages are great, but they won't physically do it for you. All they'll say is there's a problem. But if you have a truck waiting there, they're not really rushed as much as we are. They don't have that sense of urgency. So the more that, again, you have to learn. You have to be, the summary I can say is, if you want to get into these unique things, crossing borders, doing specialized heavy haul with multiple axles, doing LTL freight, we'll talk about shortly. You have to be a student to this industry. You could be in this industry for 1 year, 20 years. Never stop being a student to this industry, because the regulations are constantly changing, and it's our job to learn. We don't have to feed it all to every customer. You feed it to the customers, to what they need for their business at that moment in time to help them.
Yeah. I learned something. I don't have anything to add to that. Like that was a very in-depth explanation of some of the stuff that, you know, at least the questions to ask for moving freight out there. And I had something happen to me here recently. I've moved, I don't know, well over 1,000 loads into Canada in my career, a very high amount. This recently, I had a first happen to me where the customer, we sent the bills to the border. Everything was pre-cleared. By the time the driver got to the border, and the customs broker was looking at the document, and then they were looking at the boxes that the machinery was packaged in. They're like, there's no declared value on that box. It's listed here and it shows a 0, but this was clearly custom. Is this being utilized for the product? And then like a whole ordeal happened there where they wouldn't allow the driver to cross the border. We had to get the customer involved. They had to change it to where it was like, and then because eventually the customs broker was like, listen, they at least have to show that it has a value, whether they just have to put $5 on there or $50. It has to show a value on here because it's listed. We thought it was just a crate. This is a specialty crate and then, so again, you live and you learn, Robert. And this is where it's like, you don't have it all figured out. So, but now we got it figured out. We got everything squared away. But yeah, man, you're constantly learning. You have to be a constant student of these things because things change. Rules and regulations change all the time, especially inside of the international trade community. Yes, I understand that there is technically nothing that separates the United States and Canada and Mexico, but guess what? There is, and they have different rules and regulations that you need to follow. And if you don't stay on top of that stuff, you are going to set your customers up for a failure. I am now just thinking of this. I need to reach out to that customs broker and see if they want to be a guest on my podcast because they were phenomenal to work with. But no, I think that, you know, again, it's breaking down a lot of that stuff and staying on top of the rules and regulations that you go through.
Well, exactly. And the thing to know is that, to your point there, when a customer lists things, nothing can be free. So even if they're doing, say they have a shipment and they're sending a new product for them to their client saying, hey, why don't you look at our new product? Even if it's going to be free and it's just a demo, they have to put the value, whatever that is, and then they have to put the line items. Value listed for customs purposes only, demonstration only. Or if it's a trade show, say you're sending stuff for a trade show, you say value listed for customs purposes, going for trade show, will be returning to the United States. Other examples is engines. So you like to do machinery or heavy equipment, and say you're picking up at the port and it has to come into Canada. You have to have the emissions off the engine. There's procedures. Yeah. There's certain forms you have to fill out. You're shipping and also if you're shipping, you'd like to do steel and stuff. One caution: aluminum. Aluminum is a tricky business because of the fraud that occurred in the industry. You now have to have the smelt of country of origin of smelt. So like where it gets complicated, your customer buys scaffolding from XYZ company and they're putting it together in order and they're trying to ship it across. And all of a sudden they say, well, we see aluminum. We need the country of origin to smelt. Well, they go back to that scaffolding company and then they bought it through another company who bought it from another company. It's complicated. And textile clothing, say you're shipping some skids with hoodies. Okay, well, now you need to have the textile declaration form, which identifies the country of origin of material. And if it comes from multiple, you have to actually list each country. In some cases, you need the name of the country, the full address, everything. So you need your customs broker to help you identify that. And this is the other key. Whenever you're doing cross-border freight, always ask your carriers, what do they charge if there's a detention at the border beyond their control? Because if the drivers stop because they want to examine their own truck, like say they just want to, randomly check for contraband or whatever in their own truck, that's beyond our control. But if the carrier stopped to be their goods are examined by level 1 would be just a typical X-ray. Yeah. Level 2 is they literally go into a dock, strip the trailer and start picking it apart. Yeah. Well, if the driver's detained because it's the goods being examined, we have to compensate them. But it's best that you discuss that in advance because some carriers, once they have the power of the freight in their hands, they could turn around and say, we want $1,500 a day. And you're like, what? if I would have known this, maybe I might have chosen a different carrier. So always ask, what are your detention fees by the hour and by the day at the border to save yourself and to present that to your customer so your customer is aware of what's going on.
I love it. I love the advice here, Robert. This is fantastic, and our time is literally flown by, man.
So we can jump into the LTL if you want, real quick.
I was going to say, yeah, let's touch on it quick, or we could also save that for another conversation.
We could. It's up to you, because the border stuff, again, there's just there's a lot, because now I guess where I could touch if you wanted to. What is the role? So we're talking all about this, but what's the role that we play? Because I mentioned we're not the brokers. We're not actually clearing it. Technically, we have an arm's distance to this whole transaction.
Very true.
But remember, we are the link that kind of ties it together. So the more that, if you just want to wash your hands of it, saying it's not my problem, and you're going to let the shipper do that and then the carrier do that, well, you're not building yourself well. So again, your roles is, before, especially if it's if you have a regular shipper, you've been doing with them for years, once you've gone 5-10 shipments and everything's going good, you know who the customs broker is and everything. But the steps I'll summarize here as far as the role that, okay, so here's the role. So when your customer requests a quote from the US to Canada or vice versa, so ensure, number one, that you're using carriers that are properly set up. So you don't post on a load board and some say they think that they can do it. No, there's key questions you can ask to verify that they're legit. That's number one. And then talk about those border delay charges, know those in advance. Talk about where they're at. If you're doing partials, that's a whole another topic there. So then find out basically who is the customs broker in the load. Because I've had some where it's the shipper, sometimes it's the exporter, and some there's different parties. They say, oh no, just like last week, one of my regular customers that we always use a broker, well, it cleared under someone else. So what I like to do is, if it's a newer situation, because just like you talked about, your customer says, hey, go pick up this pipe or steel plates or something from some company in, say, Houston, and then ship it to my job site where my crew is in Toronto, Canada, or Calgary, Alberta. So, but your customer is actually based out of Ohio, right? So now the supplier is supposed to technically provide these invoices, or is your customer. You have to figure that out, get the documentation in advance, and then you look at it so you know that everything's legit. Find out who they're, because especially when you got these multiple parties, who is the actual customs broker? Then call that customs broker and verify. They'll say, oh yeah, we use this person all the time, and then maybe it's been a year since the last shipment and their account went dormant. Yeah. Now they have to so otherwise, as soon as you put that truck on it, the wheels are in action, and it's our job to keep it going. We have to do our due diligence as the broker agent to help our customers. Because if there's multiple parties involved, to keep that truck satisfied, because that's where the risk comes in. If we did not, that's the way I look at it. If I didn't tell my customer certain things in certain conditions, sometimes I'll take a loss in that load because I messed up. But if I've put on my quotes, all those conditions, so we're going to obtain, just like you talk about after hours, well, I'm going to phone that broker. What's the proper PARS email versus PAPS email? Yeah. What is your after hours? Is there an account number with this thing, or a team number like Cole International? You have team numbers. What is your after hours, right? Do you have an after hours? Because especially if you have a smaller office, some smaller offices will partner. Like someone from the West Coast may partner with another brokerage in the East Coast. And so figure all that out and know who's doing what, and double checking your paperwork. Then get your driver, you get the PAPS or PARS number. And then what you do is you ask the carrier, once they've submitted it, now you can actually go to the carrier's website and track that PARS and PAPS, make sure it's going to clear. And then if you're seeing any problems, it's taking too long, you can intervene and just find out what's going on. Because remember, if there is a problem with the customs broker, they are not going to give any information to the carrier or to you. They'll just say admin hold. Typically, admin hold means there's money owing on the account. If it's just something like I also take the time, if you have a long, complicated invoice, add up the values, because some people, we're humans, we make mistakes. Yeah. So you have to see that there's a line items like 10 of this item worth $5 each, times that should be $50. And you go through each line item, make sure the numbers match, and then add up the totals, make sure it matches. Do our due diligence. Does it have the currency of sale listed? Because that has to be listed. Does it have the country of origin? Does it have the terms of sale? Does it have the importer export? Because you can have 4 parties. Remember that. 4 parties on a commercial invoice. The importer, the exporter, the ship from, ship to. Double check everything's in where it needs to be. And our job is just to facilitate that. Regular shippers, once you get this going, it's easy. Yeah. But the infrequent ones are the ones you have to be a bit more diligent. So you just want to make sure that all this is in place. And our job is to monitor it. Once it's crossed the border, we keep everyone apprised and we carry on.
Robert, I'm very rarely left in a position where I don't have questions. That was one of the most in-depth explanations that I've heard on this, man. And again, I'm gonna have to have you come back on because I feel like we barely have scratched the surface here of a lot of the areas I want to talk with you on, man. This has been a great conversation, and we're going to definitely have you back on. How does anybody reach out to you, though, man? Because I feel like there's going to be people who are going to have questions about a lot of what you broke down right there. How does anybody reach out to you?
Let's see here. I don't even remember what my own handle is on YouTube. That's how terrible. I mean, I got R. Kowton at SPI3PL.com. And on YouTube, it's obviously CDNFreightBroker.com. See, what's my handle here? Sorry. At CDN Freight Broker 3708. So it's at CDN Freight Broker 3708. It's my channel. I've only started it simply because I had many truckers asking to share some of the information. I've not been consistent, putting videos out, but I've tried to make quality ones that I have put out. And but if not, RKOWTON at SPI3PL.com.
I love it. Robert, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk about this again. It's very rarely that I talk to somebody and I'm like, damn, this was a great conversation. And this is just a stepping stone to more conversations between the two of us, man. So I know you guys got value out of this episode. I know you guys are going to listen to this whole thing. And if you do and you're not subscribed, subscribe to the show, you guys. Get it out there to your network. That's how we grow. That's how we improve. That's how we help more and more people out there, is because of each and every one of you. And the fact that if you see value, your network's going to see value as well. I appreciate you guys. I love you guys. And we'll be talking to you soon.